Why do some habits feel almost designed to survive? Not good habits, not the habits we proudly track in an app. The other kind, the ones we say we want to stop. Checking the phone again, putting off the task again. Snacking when we are not hungry, scrolling when we meant to sleep. Telling ourselves this is the last time, and then somehow ending up back in the same loop. At first, it seems irrational. If the habit is bad for us, why would the brain keep doing it? Why would a system built for learning keep strengthening behaviors that clearly make life worse? That is the mystery. And the answer is more uncomfortable than it first appears. Because bad habits usually do not survive by accident. They survive because in some way they are being reinforced. That does not mean they are good. It means they are working, at least in the short term, at least for the learning system. And once you understand that, bad habits start to look very different. This is where operant conditioning becomes useful. At its core, operant conditioning is about a simple pattern. A behavior happens, a consequence follows. And that consequence changes the likelihood of the behavior happening again. If the consequence increases the behavior, that is reinforcement. If it decreases the behavior, that is punishment. So we already have the basic answer. Bad habits get reinforced when they produce some consequence that makes the behavior more likely to happen again. But that still leaves the more interesting question open. What kind of consequence could keep a bad habit alive? Most people assume the answer is pleasure. The habit must feel good, and sometimes that is true. A snack tastes good. A notification feels good, a win feels good. But pleasure is only part of the story. Because many bad habits are not reinforced mainly by pleasure, they are reinforced by relief. That matters a lot, because relief is a powerful teacher. If you feel stress, and then you avoid the task, and your stress drops for a moment, the brain learns something. Not a sentence, not a theory, a pattern. Avoidance reduces discomfort. And anything that reduces discomfort can become easier to repeat. That is one of the ways bad habits get built. Not because the habit is wonderful, but because it works quickly. This is where people often get tripped up by the language. They hear the word reward and imagine excitement, joy, or pleasure. But in operant conditioning, reinforcement is more technical than that. A reinforcer is not just something enjoyable. It is anything that increases the probability of a behavior happening again. So if checking your phone gives you novelty, that can reinforce checking. If procrastinating gives you temporary relief, that can reinforce procrastination. If a habit removes boredom, tension, uncertainty, or emotional friction, that can reinforce the habit too. Now the picture starts to sharpen. A bad habit does not need to be deeply satisfying. It only needs to deliver something the learning system reads as useful. Something like relief, something like distraction, something like certainty, something like a small hit of novelty. That is enough. This is what Skinner's work helped make visible. In operant conditioning, the behavior is shaped not by abstract intentions, but by consequences attached to action. In controlled environments, if a behavior leads to a useful outcome, the organism becomes more likely to repeat it. That same logic applies outside the lab. The human version just looks more complicated because the rewards are psychological. A rat may press a leva for food. A person may open an app for novelty. A student may avoid studying for relief. The details change. The learning rule does not. And now we reach the real mechanism. Bad habits get reinforced because the brain is constantly updating behavior based on what happened after the behavior. Did the action reduce discomfort? Did it create reward? Did it make the moment easier? Did it produce something interesting? If yes, the pathway gets a little stronger. The system stores the result. Not as a moral judgment, as useful information. This is the hidden rule. The brain is not asking, is this a good habit for my future? The learning system is often asking a much narrower question. Did this do something useful right now? If the answer is yes, repetition becomes more likely. That is why so many bad habits are short-term solutions that become long-term problems. Take procrastination. People often talk about it as laziness, but that is usually too shallow. Imagine you are about to start a difficult task. The task creates tension, maybe uncertainty, maybe fear of doing it badly. Then you avoid it, you check your phone, you reorganize something unimportant. You make coffee, and suddenly the discomfort drops. For a moment you feel better. That better feeling is not random. It is reinforcement. The avoidance behavior was followed by relief. So the next time the task creates tension, the avoidance pathway is easier to trigger. That is why bad habits can feel so automatic. They are not being chosen from scratch every time. They are being pulled from reinforced history. The system has learned, this route helps. even if only briefly, even if at a cost. And then there is another layer. Some bad habits are not reinforced every time. They are reinforced unpredictably, and that can make them even harder to stop. This is one of the most important ideas in operant conditioning. It is not only whether a behavior gets rewarded, it is also how often and how predictably the reward appears. If a reward happens every time, the behavior can grow quickly. But if the reward happens only sometimes, and you never know exactly when, the behavior can become very persistent. That pattern is called intermittent or partial reinforcement. This helps explain why certain bad habits are so sticky. Think about social media. You do not get something rewarding every single time you check. Not every refresh is exciting. Not every glance brings a message. But sometimes it does. Sometimes there is something new, and that uncertainty keeps the behavior alive. The next reward might be one swipe away. That is enough to maintain the loop. This is an application of the same reinforcement schedule logic used to explain why variable rewards can produce persistent responding. This is also why gambling is such a powerful example. Variable ratio schedules, where reward appears after an unpredictable number of responses, are associated with especially strong, persistent behavior. A person keeps going not because each action is rewarding, but because the system stays engaged by possibility. And once you understand that, a lot of modern bad habits start making more sense. They are not just pleasurable. They are intermittent. Now step back and notice what this means. A bad habit can be reinforced in at least two major ways. First, by giving something desirable, novelty, pleasure, stimulation. Second, by removing something unpleasant, stress, boredom, anxiety, uncertainty, and many habits use both. A person scrolls and gets novelty, while also escaping effort. A person procrastinates and gets relief, while also getting a small reward from distraction. That makes the loop stronger than it first appears. This is the deeper pattern behind bad habits. They are often not random failures of self-control. They are reinforced solutions. Poor solutions maybe, costly solutions often, but solutions nonetheless. And solutions get repeated when they work. That is the mental shift. Most people assume bad habits survive because they are weak. But a more accurate explanation is that bad habits survive because they are reinforced. The brain is not defending the habit because the habit is noble. It is defending the habit because the habit has a learning history. That changes how you interpret behavior. Instead of asking, why am I so bad at stopping this? A better question is, what is this habit rewarding? Or what discomfort is this habit removing? That question is usually much more useful because it points to the mechanism. And once you can see the mechanism, you can see why simply telling yourself to stop often fails. If the habit is still solving a short-term problem, the learning system keeps receiving evidence that the behavior is useful, which means the pattern survives, even if another part of you sincerely wants it gone. This is why bad habits often return under stress. Stress makes short-term relief more valuable. And behaviors linked to quick relief become more attractive, not because your standards disappeared, because the reinforcement value changed in the moment. So now we can answer the original mystery. How do bad habits get reinforced? They get reinforced when the behavior produces a consequence that the learning system treats as useful. That consequence might be pleasure. It might be novelty. It might be certainty. It might be relief. And if the reward appears unpredictably, the habit can become even more persistent. That is the mechanism, not weakness, not laziness learning. And that leads to the next question. If bad habits survive because they are reinforced, what happens after that? How does a repeated reinforced behavior stop feeling like a choice and start feeling automatic? How does reinforcement turn into habit architecture? That is the next layer. Because operant conditioning explains why the loop keeps getting rewarded. But the next mystery is how that loop becomes wired deeply enough to run with less and less conscious effort. That is what we will explore in the next video.